One. There we go. All right, I'm going to hold this stand like this so I don't mess anything up. But thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Katie Bowman. I work for CFE Federal Credit Union, and we are proud partners with Seminole State College. Our credit union is a not-for-profit financial institution. We were founded by educators for educators 81 years ago. Our credit union offers products and services for teachers originally, but now our membership is opened up to anyone in the Central Florida area. But we honor our roots in education, so we are very happy to be one of the sponsors of Space Week and the Winter Sky Festival here at Seminole State College. We keep education close to our heart, so we support that in any way that we can. I hope you enjoy the program tonight, and thank you again for coming out.
Hi, thanks for coming out. I'm Emilee Speck, your moderator. I work for WKMG, and I'm their local space nerd. I'm honored to be here this evening to host this event. This is the second annual Space Week, the second time they've done a roundtable like this, and this year it's all focused on these wonderful women and humans next to me who are doing pretty cool things in STEM fields. So I'm going to let them kind of introduce themselves really quick. We'll go ahead and start with Hibah over here and then move our way across.
Hibah Rahmani. I'm really excited to be here. I'm an engineer with NASA. I'm an avionics and flight controls engineer, to be more specific, and looking forward to the panel tonight.
Hi, I'm Anna Green, and I am the manager of the James S. McDonald Planetarium at the St. Louis Science Center. So it's my job to ignite and sustain lifelong science and technology learning for everybody who walks through our doors and try and get them to enjoy looking up every time they go outside.
My name is Loren Grush, and I am a science reporter for The Verge. We're a technology website, but I am all focused on space all the time.
I'm Addie Dove. I'm a professor in the physics department here at the University of Central Florida, here in Orlando, and I'm in the planetary science group there, so my area of expertise is studying planetary surfaces, and specifically dust on planetary surfaces, which is far more interesting than it sounds. Several people have heard me tell that joke before. So as a professor at UCF, I'm very excited about getting students learning science and technology, and I always do outreach events and things like that too, so I'm really excited to be here tonight.
Yeah, okay, great. They're pretty impressive, huh? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so just a little housekeeping. We are going to take questions at the end. I'm going to ask a few questions to all of our panelists, but we're also taking questions online, but we'll definitely have a chance for audience participation. So if you do have some questions, keep those, and probably towards the end we'll go ahead and select a few people. So we're just going to get right into it. This first question is for all of our panelists. We're going to, again, start with Hibah and work our way down. What I love is all the stories that people tell about how they were inspired to work in science, technology, engineering, and math fields. So I'd like to hear from you ladies. What inspired you to work in STEM, and who inspired you, or what? Was it a book? Was it a mentor? You know, let me know.
So I always enjoyed math and science. As a kid, whenever I would solve a math problem, it would always give me a sense of accomplishment, knowing that I figured out something that was kind of difficult or challenging. When I would read my science textbook, the chapter about the planets and the solar system, that was always my favorite chapter. And I would try to recreate any experiments that I would read about in my science textbook. I would try to recreate them at home if I could. And so engineering was kind of a natural fit just because I always enjoyed math and science. Another thing that inspired me was my family and I, when we would walk at night, I would always look at the moon and stars, and it was just such an inspirational sight. And when I would look at the moon, I would always think about the astronauts that had walked on the moon, such as Neil Armstrong. So those are some of the things that inspired me to pursue a career in engineering.
I started getting it ingrained in me from the time I was an infant, and my dad would put his physics textbooks in front of me. There's pictures of me as a baby looking at them. And from there, I actually grew up outside of NASA Ames in Northern California. And so one of my playgrounds as a child was an old stage Titan rocket that I would climb in. And then I would come to St. Louis and visit my grandparents, and they took me to my first planetarium show in the planetarium that I manage now. And then from there, as I grew up, that was what I always wanted to do. I always wanted to be going to the planetarium. Star Lab was my absolute favorite assembly every year at school. And I started volunteering in my planetarium as I was working on student teaching and fulfilling my K-12 license. And I realized that I was never going to be in the classroom because I had fallen too much in love with being in my planetarium. And I wound up having two mentors who actually may have produced and shown me my first show when I was 4 years old. So they've inspired me to continue doing that and to see the effect that I can have on children and inspire them to do just great things in the STEM field is something that just, it warms my heart in a way that I can't even describe.
So I actually grew up outside of NASA. I'm the daughter of two NASA engineers. They're now retired, happily. But when I was growing up, I did not think NASA was cool at all, because when your parents do it, it's definitely not cool. But I was always surrounded by it. It was always the talk of, at the dinner table, was about, I always remembered like water spray boilers and the hydraulic systems. Those were the terms that I would kind of like learn through osmosis. And I was always very good at science and math, but I was also very drawn to storytelling. So if you knew me as a kid, I was very much always behind a camera. So I went into broadcast journalism. And then when I started getting into the field, I found myself actually more drawn to the stories that I thought were not cool when I was a kid. And I also started to realize just how cool my parents actually were and how special it was growing up. So, it took going through adolescence to figure that out. And so, yeah, eventually once I started writing, I was like, I think I just want to focus on space. And when I would tell that to people, they would be like, what? But with that focus, now I write about space full time, and I love it.
I think my story is similar to some of the others you've heard here, where from a very, very early age I was interested in being an astronaut, and I was always fascinated by the planets and the stars. There was a program at my elementary school when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, and we got to apply, and I was selected as an astronaut. We converted a space shuttle, or a bus, into a space shuttle, and we drove around to different schools in the area and did science experiments on different planets. And so that was just like a phenomenal experience, and I've always been interested in understanding how things work. And so I went into physics with an emphasis in astronomy because I knew that was what would get me there. And I still dream of going to the moon, but now I dream of doing it and like doing science there and studying what's happening at the surface and how we can understand planets and the whole solar system better. And so throughout my career, I've just sort of been following that dream and seeing how I can get to the next step and encourage others along the way. And so I'm excited to be here in Orlando, and I've been here for about 6 years now, and it's been a phenomenal experience.
Awesome. So this kind of follows up on that, but what advice do you have for girls or young women who want to get involved in your respective fields or writing about space possibly? Do you have any advice for them? Hibah?
So my advice to anyone who wants to pursue a career in engineering or any of the STEM fields is simply just to go for it. Dream big, stay focused, don't let anything get in the way of achieving your goals. And I do, sometimes I do outreach activities with NASA. As part of NASA, I go and talk to students in different schools. And one example I like to give is when I did my undergraduate from UCF, University of Central Florida. And when I was in my first semester, I failed my first physics test. I don't like to admit to that, but I did. And I was kind of disappointed first couple of days after I got my failed test back. But I knew I was not going to let that one class or that one grade get in the way of me becoming an engineer. And because of that determination, I was able to pull up my grade in the class, and I ended up with an A in the class. So my message to anyone who wants to pursue a career in STEM is to go for it and don't let any obstacles get in your way.
I actually found a very roundabout way into STEM. I always loved science. It was my favorite class in school. I was pleased that they didn't put names when they posted grades because I was the one who set the curve that ruined everyone else. And I didn't want people to know that. Sorry, guys. And then when I got to college, I kind of changed routes. I discovered that foreign languages and I clicked pretty well. And I also thought I was going to be an opera singer, so I was going to be a school teacher by day, teaching foreign languages, and an opera singer by night. That very quickly, I got a reality check on that one. And as I moved forward with it, I realized that I still was missing that science component, and I found I was visiting the observatory on campus and still enjoy going to planetariums. And as I was working on that teaching certification, I saw something in the book that said, you know, if you get burned out on being in the classroom, you might want to consider going into the museum. And I originally thought, no, I'm never going to get burned out on being in the classroom. And I didn't. I just fell more in love with being in the museum. And what really started spurring that thought was visiting NASA again, and also Smithsonian Air and Space. And I saw how much everybody loved, including security guards and anybody who was on staff there, talking to people and sharing all of these inspiring stories of what got people to the moon, or what prompted the Wright brothers to have their first flight, and that human side of everything. And that was a story I knew I could tell. That was a story that inspired me, and I wanted to go out and tell it, and that brought science back into my life. And it was shortly thereafter that I started volunteering at the Planetarium and slowly nagged my mentor enough to let me start using the star projector and bringing that love of astronomy back into my life. And I couldn't get enough of it. It was just something I craved constantly. So I found my way back to it. So I think that if it's something you want to do, even if it's something that you're not sure how to go about doing it first, you'll find a way if you just keep pushing for it and just keep following what you love doing.
Yeah, kind of adding on to that, I think don't be deterred by feeling out of place or like you can't do it. And I run into that even now, just because, I mean, luckily or hopefully things are changing, but it's still a very male-dominated profession, and it can be easy to feel out of place, let's say when you're at a rocket launch and the press site is filled with men, who I love, by the way, but they, you know, it sometimes can be hard to find another female face, and sometimes when I would show up, I kind of wanted to run away because I'm the only one in, you know, boots, and I was doing my makeup, and, you know, I thought, oh gosh, I'm the weirdo here. But I think my advice is to kind of push through that feeling of otherness, and it will be much more fulfilling, and just don't let people tell you that you're weird for wanting to pursue this.
So through a lot of my career, I didn't think a lot about like necessarily who my mentors were, or that like what role they played specifically, but looking back, right, I know who the really strong mentors were, and some of them you can identify at the time, right? I had a biology teacher in high school who was like super encouraging and always trying to get me to do biology instead of physics, and really wanted me to do really well and achieve great things. And I had a lot of mentors throughout my career, I think, who helped me see like what the different options were, and made those available. And part of that was I went out and pursued opportunities. So I went and looked for research when I was in undergraduate, and I went and found different people to do different research with in graduate school. But another part of that is just finding people who you work well with, and sometimes that's a challenge, but once you do find those people who can help you make yourself better, if you can follow what you want to do, you'll find a great set of people to work with, I think. And it is challenging a lot of times when you're surrounded by people who aren't used to seeing someone like you around. But I've been mostly fortunate that I've been very encouraged throughout my career. And so I think like having people up here that can show that that's a great thing and that can encourage others is really important also.
Okay, great. We're going to start with Loren on this question because it's a communication issue question, but I think we all face communication issues sometimes. Specifically, what are some of the communication issues you face while telling people about what you do or the stories you're telling? You want to start, Loren?
So one thing I had kind of drilled into me when I came to the Verge is to stop speaking like an engineer. And because I'm sure you guys are aware that engineers like to speak in acronyms.
What? Never.
And, you know, it's a very technical field, so there's a lot of jargon that's associated with the job. So it can be difficult, actually, to talk in a way that people can understand. It's easier, I think, to talk in a more esoteric way. And not necessarily because you know more, it's just the way that things are described, you know? And so you kind of lull into how people who work on the systems describe the systems. So one of my challenges when I go to work is to sit and think, okay, if I were telling this to, you know, my boyfriend or my friend who rarely looks at this stuff, would they be able to understand? And so that oftentimes takes a step back and you think, okay, I have to figure out a way to say it other than the acronym, other than the technical way of saying it. So it's really just remembering that not everybody that you communicate with understands this, and to explain it in a way, you know, a good method is also, you know, analogies. I like to use analogies for things, comparisons for sizes. You know, 500 feet doesn't really mean anything to anybody, but if you say that's, you know, 50 stories, that makes more sense to someone. So little things like that, just remembering that not everybody's an engineer.
Addie, do you want to follow up on that? I know you're involved in a podcast. That's a great way to communicate, but I'm sure there's other issues you face, even talking to reporters like us.
Yeah, you guys usually do a pretty good job of telling me when I'm using too much jargon. Yeah, I mean, so it's really, as you mentioned, it's really easy to slip into using jargon. I present to a lot of like school groups and student groups, so that gives me a chance to try to do it at a number of different levels. A lot of times I talk about regolith, which is like the dirt on the moon and dirt on asteroids and stuff like that, but you have to say like it's broken up bits of rock, and it's finding ways to describe things that people can relate to. And yeah, so we do a podcast, and a lot of that is, it's called Walk About the Galaxy. You can find it on iTunes. And a lot of that is just taking a popular science story and finding a way to talk about it, sort of how we would talk about it normally, but put that out there for other people to hear about and tell jokes about and things like that. So.
Great. Anna, how about you?
So a lot of what we run into is universal design, making sure as many people who come into the museum can find what they're exploring accessible. So whether it be having somebody there to maybe describe our Gemini and Mercury spacecraft that we have in our lobby and tell them stories about what was going on in there, because someone thinks that the Mercury spacecraft held 3 astronauts and landed on the moon for Apollo, and explaining, well, no, it was a lot more rudimentary than that, or that they're not space shuttles, and finding that story that helps link them to it and make that personal connection and make it something that's part of their life. Or maybe it's making a star show, a planetarium show, accessible for a child who's blind. They can't see the stars. So how do you do that? Do you make plush characters of the stars, the cartoon stars, so that they can feel the stars and feel the varying temperatures through rice inside of them that you've heated up in the microwave, and there are different fabrics to give them a different feel for the different temperatures, or creating a Braille follow-along guide so that they can feel it, and then along the way you learn that kids who are on the autism spectrum, all of a sudden this is clicking with them too, and it's finding those different ways to approach the different learning styles that maybe, for those of you who maybe have taken teaching classes, Gardner's multiple learning styles, it's tapping into as many of those as much as you can, all of the senses whenever you can, and listening to feedback too. Asking if someone understands, or if they come up with a good way of explaining that, using that to help reach more people.
Awesome. And Hibah, you do a lot of NASA outreach as well, so what issues do you face?
I think my response is going to be the same as the other panelists. Acronyms is a big one. We at NASA use a lot of acronyms. And I do have a funny story that I'd like to share. When I first started working at Kennedy Space Center, one of my coworkers actually told this story to me. He said he used to work at Stennis Space Center, which is another NASA center before he came here at Kennedy Space Center. And he said his mentor was giving him a tour of Stennis Space Center, pointing out things. And he goes, well, what's that thing over there? He says, that's a BRT. So the mentor goes, that's a BRT. So this coworker of mine goes, well, what's a BRT? And he said, big round thing, because I don't know what it's called, so I just made up an acronym for it. So we use a lot of acronyms, and when I do outreach activities or talk to people outside of NASA, I have to be careful either to spell out the acronym or explain in a simple way what it is that I'm trying to get across.
And I know one other thing I think that's really important is having, so not everybody is going to be great at making their science relatable or their engineering technology relatable, right? There are some people who are just really good at their jobs but aren't really good at explaining it to everybody. And so I think having people who are able to communicate the science and make it more relatable is also like enormously important, right? Because I can do my science in the lab all I want, but being able to tell that to somebody else who can translate it into an exciting story with visuals and things like that is really, really important too, and it makes it more accessible for everybody. So I think that complementary way to do it in the planetarium or in news articles, right, is really a key component that has sort of dwindled a lot lately, but is coming back and is obviously in this area is really popular. So.
Yeah, I'd like to say I kind of think of myself as a translator sometimes because I like to sometimes it is very helpful to have been on the space beat for so long because I can write up a story really quickly, but one thing I also try not to do is assume that I have all the answers. That way I make sure I go to the right people, and then I can kind of take that and you know, put it into a way that people understand. So yeah, translating is a good word for what I do, I think.
Okay. This is a follow-up on that. We're kind of living in the age of fake news, unfortunately. But what do you find? Do you find that people are well informed about space exploration? Or do you have advice for if someone is not so informed, how they could maybe get up to speed? Hibah, do you want to start?
Sure. So what I find is that when I talk to someone outside of NASA and they find out that I work for NASA, they get really excited and they want to know all about my work, what I do. So I see there's a lot of excitement, but not everyone is aware of the work that is being done at NASA, all the cool things we do, like launching rockets, doing research on the International Space Station, developing ground systems for future exploration missions. So there is a need for more education and coverage to ensure that people are more informed about the space program. And my recommendation or advice on how to improve that, I think is kind of what we're doing over here to promote events like this where we talk about space exploration, talk about the space program, or talk about women in STEM, and that's
great.
We get a wide range of visitors in their knowledge base. So everybody from a novice to someone who knows more than me and I'm ready to just pull up a chair and ask them to tell me everything that they know, particularly because the space race had a home in St. Louis in the 60s with Mercury and Gemini, and so we get a lot of the engineers who built the Mercury and Gemini spacecraft in the planetarium, and they come and they share those stories with us and give us more stories that we can tell. But then we also get visitors coming in and they've heard about flat Earth, or they've heard about various other things, and maybe they want to know more, or maybe they want to have a debate with us, but we're that place where they can come and do that safely and not feel criticized, and hopefully learn more. Hopefully we can inspire them to go do more research and have open minds and delve deeper into that. But sometimes it's hard getting that across, and sometimes we have people who very much disagree with what we have to say, and it's trying to respectfully have that conversation with everyone, and hoping that they can walk away feeling respected and also wanting to know more and finding out the scientific truths that we're trying to establish and present.
I will say, I think with the commercial space industry becoming much more, in the eyes of the public, I think that a lot more people than a couple years ago are definitely more involved in space news. With that said, though, I mean, there's just a lot of news in general now. So I think it can be difficult to kind of get into the intricacies of what spaceflight entails, which is totally understandable. But yeah, like Hibah was saying, I think people are they're more excited, if not informed, and I try to run with that as much as possible when it comes to reaching people. My strategy is more of kind of how do I break through the kind of onslaught of news that is happening at all times, and that can be a challenge, but it's finding ways that it relates to people, and not always, it can be tough too, because a lot of other publications will want to sensationalize space news because it's easy to do that. There are certain stories that come out where it's like, oh, is it aliens? And our
It's never aliens. It's probably not
it's
aliens.
it's never aliens. But yeah, so it's our way of it's a fine balance. You have to, you want it to be exciting for people, but also we need to take a step back and say, okay, let's not freak out here. This is actually what's going on. So it can be a challenge, but I mean, that's how I do it. I like it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, so I'm in planetary science, and one of the things that's happened for a long time since the shuttle program ended is that there's a lot of people who are like, oh, well, NASA is not doing anything anymore, right? Even though like they're building rockets and stuff like that, but from my viewpoint, like the science never stopped, right? So we've still been launching all these missions to planets. New Horizons was such a phenomenal success that like people were like, all right, NASA is doing those kinds of missions. But so like the science that NASA's doing and the things they're doing at the centers and the things we're doing as scientists associated with NASA or with space in general, like hasn't stopped, right? We're still going to keep doing science and looking for ways to explore the universe. It just might not be with human crews right now. And so I think that that's one thing that I try to remind people is that there's lots of awesome science going on. And also that there's probably not an alien megastructure is one thing we do run into sometimes. But it's a good debate, right? You can talk about the science of why it's not an alien megastructure.
I think I wrote that story like last week.
Oh,
2
yeah.
weeks ago.
It's dust, probably.
Yeah, it's dust.
Space dust.
Okay. So we've already addressed a little bit here that women make up a little more than half the population, but yet in STEM fields, it's around 14%. So clearly we have a ways to go, and there are some issues that women face in general. I'm going to start with Anna on this one. In your particular field, how do you handle sometimes the issues of mansplaining or misogyny that might come about? You've said you have lots of people with a wealth of knowledge that live in St. Louis, and some more than others, but you're also pretty darn smart yourself. So how do you handle issues like that?
I take a deep breath. And I one of the things that's sometimes hard for me, and it was hard when I was student teaching too, is that to realize that sometimes it's hard now even just to say you aren't going to reach everyone, at least in that moment, but maybe you can give them something to take home and ponder or reflect upon. But that is really hard. It's really hard to be told, oh, well, you weren't alive for that, so you wouldn't know. Or you would look a lot smarter if you would wear glasses because you're just a dumb blonde. Or anything along those lines. And it's hard to sometimes to stand up straight and continue along your path of, well, I do know what I'm talking about, and this is why, and this is what there is. And one experience comes to mind where I had a gentleman tell me that how could I possibly know about Mercury and Gemini? I used to do a lot of interpretation with the spacecraft, and how could I know anything about them because I wasn't alive at the time? and then proceeded to tell his grandchild that the Mercury spacecraft was Apollo and landed on the moon with 3 men inside of it. And so I tried to very, very gently and respectfully say, you know, I know they look very similar in shape, but this one was actually Mercury, and it held one person, like the closest planet to the sun was the first, and it was the first program, and it held one person. We kind of walked through it, and his grandchild was just so enraptured with what I was saying that she took me by the hand and led me around for 45 minutes asking questions. So, and then he continued to follow and listen. So sometimes it's also finding an alternate route, or stay, it's really, for me at least, just trying to stay the course and do what I know is right, and tell the stories and the facts that I know are true, and just know that sometimes it's hard, and sometimes I'm not going to be listened to, and sometimes I look to other women too, to know maybe how I could handle it better in the future, or what there is, because it is hard to hear that. I'm not going to say it's not, but it's also really inspiring to look out and see other women, like the women who are sitting up here with me today, and those of you in the audience who came out today too, and know that there are other smart women out there, and we're all doing really good things, and that helps push forward too.
Hibah, do you have anything to add?
I'd just like to say that I guess I think there are multiple ways to handle situations like this. You can choose to ignore, or you can choose to speak up. But no matter what, you should always be professional and respectful. And if someone is being disrespectful to you, that's on them. That's not on you. You should not let anyone else's behavior stop you from doing what you want to do or what you want to say. So keep that in mind always.
Absolutely. Loren?
So one of the benefits of my job is that a lot of people follow me online. And one of the downsides of my job is that a lot of people follow me online. So sometimes when I say things, they can be a little controversial. It's actually funny that you're asking this now, because just, I think, a couple days ago, I mentioned that we should maybe start saying the word crewed instead of manned spaceflight. And I did not realize how controversial of a statement that would be on my Twitter account. So a lot of times making statements and like that will come with a lot of men explaining to me, not necessarily politely, why they think that's wrong. And you know, sometimes I have to take a step back and not engage, because it can be very demoralizing, but sometimes I do, and I'm actually always pleasantly surprised. So oftentimes it's not necessarily that great when I do engage and it just starts a fight, but sometimes when I do, I'll get a message. Like, I got a message from one of the guys who saw that tweet, and he said, you know what, I never actually thought about that, and now I will try to make an effort to say that from now on. And it honestly made all of the hatred and vitriol worth it, and I replied to him, and I was like, you know what, thank you for saying that. So I think my advice is just, you know, sometimes it can be really demoralizing to deal with that, but if you push through and try to make an effort to communicate when people are trying to mansplain and be that way, sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised at the response.
Addie?
So let's see. So the field I'm in is in physics and astronomy, is mostly male-dominated, but in planetary science, there's actually a very large percentage of women. And I think part of that comes from the fact that planetary science is a mix of a lot of different fields of science, and so you get a lot of people who are interested in different things with different expertise. I don't know, I haven't done a study on my own to see why it is exactly. But that being said, throughout my undergraduate, it was mostly male colleagues, and through graduate school, I had a lot of male friends and male colleagues. And I think being surrounded by that for so long, sometimes you don't even notice that something's missing right away. Until, like, later on when it's pointed out to you, like, oh yeah, did you have strong female mentors? And I was really lucky in high school. My physics teacher was a female. My advisor in undergrad was a female, so we had one astronomy professor when I first started at the University of Missouri, and she was this amazing British woman who has tattoos and purple hair most of the time. I don't know, her hair's always different colors. But she was phenomenal, and she was this great mentor to me, and I did research with her. And then, so like along the way, I've had really strong female mentors that have helped guide me, and I think it's having things like that, or having people who aren't actively hostile against you is pretty nice. And then you start to realize that there are people who like maybe are mansplaining to you a lot, and or if you, as you rise in the ranks to your different places in your career, especially in physics and astronomy, you encounter lower ratios of females. And so like there's not very many women in the physics department at UCF. The percentages are going up, and at most places around the country. But I think that there's a lot of awareness in the community of that now. And so there's the Me Too movement, right? But even before that, there was a lot of pushback in the astronomy and physics, specifically the astronomy community, a couple years ago, that really brought a big change in like how people view other people in the community. And I think that was huge, and it actually preceded some of the other things that are coming up now. And so I think just like an awareness of things like that helps, and talking about it also helps, but sometimes it's hard to talk about.
I would also add too with that I think it's so important too for women to support each other on that too. I've read so many articles on how women can be catty with each other in the workplace, but when we stand together as, I don't want to say a force to be reckoned with, but a force to be reckoned with, God, we get so much done. And not only that, it's being someone that young women can look up to, but also young men, and to see that this is a norm. This is a norm to have women in those roles, so that hopefully one day we won't have to be asking the question of how do you handle mansplaining and misogyny. So I think women supporting women in these roles is absolutely huge as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of female colleagues who write about science and space, and we always have each other's back, you know, if something's getting nasty online. And also, on that same note, I try to associate with men who raise women up as well, male reporters. So I think by showing how my network of people, you know, like these are the people that I respect, hopefully I'm kind of sending a positive message that, you know, women are to be respected and loved, and here are the people that I associate with, and they feel the same way.
Absolutely. Building on top of that, this past year we saw the Me Too movement come about with some very, very many unfortunate stories of harassment in the workplace and outside of it. This question can be for everyone, but if anyone has a particular instance they want to talk about, after the Me Too movement, did this affect any of your workplaces? Did you have conversations within your team, or did you see no changes at all? Does anybody want to jump at that?
I mean, I can jump in because it's definitely been hitting the media industry pretty hard, and our company has had a lot of conversations about it, and we are being as proactive as we can be. Like I believe we're forming a new sexual harassment task force, and we're definitely trying to encourage an environment where we can speak up and making it known that, you know, it is definitely not okay. This behavior is not something to be hushed. It's something that we need to, you know, be very vocal. This is not okay. But it has been a struggle, especially because I've seen not necessarily colleagues, but people I respect. You know, the other day I saw somebody who I thought was a big fan of my work. I'm sure he was, and I respected him, and it turned out, you know, he might have been inappropriate. So it's definitely a struggle right now, but I do feel fortunate that my company is being very constructive about it, and I hope other companies aren't just trying to shy away from it either. I think it's something that we definitely need to continue the conversation about, it's not just a moment to get through, it's something that we need to transcend and turn into a new, world order.
Yeah, for the last 2 or 3 years now, I'm trying to remember exactly when it started, but most of the large scientific conferences I've gone to, so there's the American Geophysical Union Conference and like the AAS, there's an acronym, the American Astronomical Society. At all of those big conferences I've been to for the past like 2 or 3 years, there have been very large public awareness campaigns, billboards, places about speaking up, don't stay silent, reporting harassment, having safe places at the meetings to go and talk to people if you need to. And partly because a lot of that came within our community a few years ago, there's been a lot of that and really public support of that at meetings. That being said, there's a lot of people who are like, why is this stuff here? This is dumb, we don't need to do any of this, right? Everything is fine. And you're like, well, okay, maybe for you, old white man. Yeah. So I think having that kind of support in the community in general is a huge thing, and it's definitely helping people vocalize and feel more comfortable in that space.
So I'd like to start out by saying that NASA has an anti-harassment policy in place, which is basically any kind of harassment is prohibited. We do have, should anyone have a complaint of this sort, there are different avenues or resources available. You can go to your manager. We also have at each of the NASA centers, there's an anti-harassment coordinator. You can go talk to them, and there are also counselors available on site. As a result of the Me Too movement, the workforce was sent out reminders. We get a daily news, and we were reminded about the policy and the resources available to everyone. So that was as a result of the Me Too movement that we were sent out that reminder. In my personal experience working at NASA Kennedy Space Center, I work with very professional people, and I'm truly fortunate and blessed to work with them, and everyone is very professional and respectful.
My institution also has an anti-harassment policy, and they're pretty strict with that, and at least fortunately for me, that hasn't been an issue, and as far as I know, it hasn't been in my place of work, but where it has come up has been within the professional development community. And so due to some of what gotta avoid the acronyms. There's so many. Due to what was seen within the astronomy community, it was decided by the Great Lakes Planetarium Association, or GLPA, that it was time to have an anti-harassment policy go into place. And so I was actually asked to help with that, and I am very, very proud to have helped with that statement. We looked at what a bunch of different professional development communities have done, as well as what our own institution's anti-harassment policies said. And GLPA just put that into place, and at the conference that was held last year, where it brought together all of the planetarium professional organizations of the United States, the other ones started hearing about it as well. And so I'm very pleased to know that the International Planetarium Society, or IPS, and also the Southeastern Planetarium Association, which is holds Seminole State's planetarium as well, they're very, very passionate about this as well. And so both IPS and SEPA are putting theirs into place as well, and they take it extremely seriously. And they've made it a lot more welcoming for both women and men to come forward if there is an issue. We wanted to make sure as well that LGBT rights were included within these anti-harassment policies as well. And so what we found is that it's opened a lot of doors for good communication and discussions and educating people and letting them know that maybe what they thought was funny is actually uncomfortable, and getting everybody on the right path to making sure that we're all respecting each other and learning and still enjoying that family atmosphere that our community has, but again, while being respectful in those situations.
Okay, great. So I want to get into some fun stuff and have everybody kind of talk about their work. I want to start with Addie on this one. So you mentioned before, obviously, we're not sending humans up from the Space Coast right now, but there's lots of other science going on. So you want to talk a little bit about that and what's going on at UCF?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm always happy to talk about science. Yeah, so I'm in the Planetary Science group at UCF, and I work in what we call the Center for Microgravity Research. And so that is some laboratory space that we have on campus, but it encompasses more than that. So a lot of what we do is try to understand planet formation, and also the surfaces of things like asteroids and comets and moons. So all those places are dusty environments that also have low gravity and have these interesting interactions at different speeds and things like that. And so a lot of the research I do in the lab is trying to understand that, but then we also get to do really fun and very important for science, things like go on the parabolic airplane flights. So the Vomit Comet, although it's no longer, the Vomit Comet itself no longer flies, it's the zero-G aircraft, G-Force One. And so we get to do a lot of experiments in microgravity flights. I build experiments that have gone up on Blue Origin spacecraft. We're hoping to launch some with them later this year. It's all part of a team of researchers, but also students. So one of the best parts about my job is that I get to work with undergraduate students, from engineers to physics majors to pre-med and bioscience majors who just want to get some lab experience. And we have our student engineers, some of whom are in the audience right now, that are actually building these experiments that go up into space. We've had some go up to the International Space Station. And so we're doing all these really fun experiments trying to understand planets and how they work and what's happening on the surfaces of them.
All right, let's move to Loren. So I really enjoyed the Verge Spacecraft series, so I want to hear you talk about that and kind of how that idea came about.
Well, like, first, do you have any info on the next Blue Origin launch?
Not that I can disclose
All right,
here.
fine. I'm just doing my job, sorry.
We're on, I think we're a couple out still.
Okay. Yeah, so as I said, my education is in broadcast. So I really love doing video, and we really wanted to make a fun visual series about space, but do it in a way that, you know, isn't standoffish and not very technical, like I was saying earlier. So basically the idea that we came up with is, let's put Loren in a bunch of weird space situations and see how she does. So our first season, which went up this past August, I got to try on spacesuits at the University of North Dakota. We went to Houston's virtual reality lab and the neutral buoyancy lab and got to pretend to spacewalk. I didn't get to go in the pool, unfortunately, but but I did get to put on the helmet and got very nauseous. So yeah, the basic premise was, you know, we wanted to kind of take you into what it takes to be an astronaut through the lens of somebody who doesn't really do training, aka me, and just try to have a lot of fun with it. So yeah, we got a lot of great response, and a lot of people said that they kind of felt like they wanted to get more into space now because watching it, and that kind of just warmed my heart. And so now we're working on season 2, and the general theme so far is, you know, what it takes to live or go to another planet. And yeah, hopefully, I think we're aiming to get that out in April or May, but don't quote me on that.
Are you going to go to Titan?
Our budget's not that big.
Is there a website we can?
Yes, you can go to theverge.com/science, or you can go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/theverge. I've done a few podcasts, can you tell? But yeah, and there should be a spacecraft playlist as well that has all the videos in one section on YouTube.
Okay, jumping over to Hibah. So you work for the Launch Services Program. Maybe not a lot of people know what that is. Can you tell us a little bit what you do with the program and why it's important?
Sure. So I work in the engineering directorate at Avionics engineering branch, but I support the Launch Services Program. And what the Launch Services Program does is they match the spacecraft to the correct rocket based on the mass and size of the spacecraft. And my job entails working on the rocket. I work on commercial rockets like Falcon 9 and Pegasus. And we are involved from the beginning, from certifying a rocket to integrated testing, processing, and then we're there on launch day. The LSP team is where we are monitoring the health and telemetry of the rocket, making sure everything is working properly. So that is a short summary of LSP and what we do.
Great. What do you love most about what you do?
My favorite part is obviously launch day, because that's when years and years of hard work comes together. And just recently we had the 2-year anniversary of the Jason 3 launch that launched on top of a Falcon 9 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And that mission, I think we worked on it like 5 or 6 years at least. We did certification for a few years. We were involved in when the rocket was being put together and being tested. We do post-test data reviews to make sure everything is working as expected for the avionics system. And then we are there on launch day monitoring health and telemetry, as I mentioned. So it literally took years and years of hard work by the whole team to get that rocket to launch. And I felt such a sigh of relief when that launched, because it was, like I said, it was years and years of hard work that the team had put together. So it was really exciting to finally see that launch.
For those who don't know what Jason 3 is, you want to tell us what the mission was?
Like I said, I work on the rocket, and so so Jason,
you can take a pass if you want.
Jason 3 was supposed to study the oceans. Okay, I'm getting a nod from my from down there. So yes, that's funny, because you were talking about communication. A lot of people, when they ask me about the satellite, I'm like, well, I work on the rocket. I can give you an explanation of the rocket. But Jason 3 was supposed to study oceans, and as I mentioned, worked on the Falcon 9. So you can ask me anything you want on the Falcon 9. But
great, we'll do. Okay, so we're going to jump over to Anna. So the St. Louis Science Center is hosting a traveling exhibit through the Smithsonian, Destination Moon, which is a big passion project of yours. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, we're so excited. I mean, we all are really excited, but then there's me excited. So we're a Smithsonian affiliate museum, and we were approached by the Smithsonian, I guess it was early last year, or maybe it was late the year before. The eclipse and the conference kind of ran everything together in my head. But we were approached by them asking if we would want to consider hosting the Destination Moon exhibit. And the Destination Moon exhibit came about because Air and Space is doing some remodeling, and they didn't want to leave the Apollo 11 command module Columbia just sitting in storage for 2 years. So they decided that they were going to select 4 institutions to host it as a traveling exhibit, and we were one of the institutions hosted. So we are going to be getting the Apollo 11 command module starting April 14th, and I'm going to say it, I'm over the moon about it. So I was brought in pretty early to help prep, discuss what could possibly come of it, and then I had to be quiet about it for 9 months, which was really, really, I couldn't even tell my team about it, and it was really hard. And so I was really excited when the announcement was made, and we have hit the ground running. We have so many things planned for it, but we're actually going to be adding on to the exhibit. So there's going to be the Smithsonian portion, and then which I mean, that's the bread and butter right there. You can't beat having Columbia. But we are going to try and add on some pretty cool experiences for entry and exit. So we want to immerse you in the story of the early space program in the 60s leading up to it. Of course, we want to tell the St. Louis story. We want to tell Mercury and Gemini, too, because that was such a huge part of who St. Louis is. And so we're going to take you leading through, we're going to have Walter Cronkite, of course, talking about, the landing, and just immerse you in what it was like to live during that era, live during the Cold War, lived during the space race, and understand why this was such a important and cool event, and why we had to meet Kennedy's goal of landing on the moon before the end of the decade, and not just landing on the moon, but returning those astronauts home safely, and the stories of the astronauts, and not just the astronauts, but the people who got them there, the engineers, the mission controllers, who I'm going to be super biased and say they're my favorites, and talk about all of these people who went into this program. And then after you go through this exhibit and experience it from the Smithsonian, when you come out on the other side, it's going to be fairly hands-on. We're actually in-house. I'm pretty proud of our team. We're building, I shouldn't say we, our exhibits team is building a climb and command module, so you can experience it, since Smithsonian frowns upon getting in the real one. And then also we want to have a lunar module. We're going to have some of the stations from Mission Control, and we're going to be focusing on some of them. And I may bring out my Gene Kranz white vest and walk around in the exhibit in that periodically. And then what I'm really excited about too is that we are putting a spotlight on the women behind Apollo as well. So one of my absolute favorites, Margaret Hamilton, of course, who wrote the code for the CSM, or the Command and Service Module, there it is again, Command and Service Module computer, as well as the Lunar Module, or LEM computers. And she is just the coolest. She is so interesting, and the passion that she put into it. But also some of those other names that are finally coming to light, the hidden figures, so Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, and there's just a whole myriad of women, and the wives and the families of the astronauts too. If it weren't for their support, we wouldn't have gotten there either. So it's really fun to go and tell these stories, especially when my first introductions to space were from that side. And I love astronomy, but I also really love talking about, don't kill me, the manned spaceflight program. NASA has this in their style guide. I've looked it up. Right. So if you were talking about Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, it's technically manned, and then after you get past that point, it becomes crewed. So I try really hard to make the distinction that NASA has set forth, but right. I also don't have a problem with calling everything crewed as well. So, but it's as you can tell, I am really, really excited about it. So you're all welcome to come visit it too. It's just such a unique opportunity, and it's going to be so amazing to provide that opportunity to people who maybe aren't going to be able to go to DC to see it, but now it's going to be in their backyard, or maybe it's just 1 or 2 states over, and they can come see it more easily and see that piece of history and understand why going to space is important to their lives, how it impacted them, and how it's going to continue to impact them as we push forward in space with what you're working on, and the findings that we're getting from the regolith samples that we got back then, and what they're telling us now, and what James Webb's going to do for us, and what Orion's going to do, and what the Starliner's going to do from Boeing, and there's just a world of opportunity out there, and this exhibit's going to help demonstrate that.
So Anna kind of just already answered this question a little bit, and this is for everyone, but what excites you most about space exploration and space flight, or who excites you? Like, what are you excited to see from people, maybe? Hibah, do you want to go first?
So from a people standpoint, as I mentioned before, I work with amazing people. That's actually one of the main reasons I like my job. From a mission standpoint, I'm looking forward to some of the LSP launches this year that I'm involved in. We have the TESS mission, which is coming up in March. It's going to launch from a Falcon 9. And TESS, I did read up on this particular spacecraft. This is going to study exoplanets. And we don't have a new launch date yet, but the ICON spacecraft will launch from a Pegasus. And the Pegasus is a cool launch in the sense that the Pegasus launches from the belly of an airplane. So we have that launch coming up, and ICON will, I also read up on this spacecraft, ICON will study, there's the dynamic environment between Earth weather and space weather. That's what ICON will study. So those are the two missions that I'm looking forward to from an LSP standpoint. I'm also looking forward to in the future when we will launch astronauts from Kennedy Space Center on commercial vehicles. Looking forward to that as well.
Me too. Anna, was there anything you wanted to add onto? I know you mentioned a couple things, but.
I mean, I could probably go on forever and ever and ever about it. Just everything we learn about us by going into space and studying space, everything we learn about us on Earth. By going to the moon, we learned more about our Earth, and it's that innate human sense and desire and need to explore and know more about us and our story and the world and the universe around us. And that sense of awe is just one of the most inspiring things that I can think of.
Awesome. Loren, how about you?
I'm very excited about covering the commercial space industry. I think that's my favorite part of the job, just because I feel like they're so wacky, you know. They're so creative, and they think outside the box in ways that you just wouldn't expect. And there's just so many different opportunities. I mean, I think there's one company is thinking of turning spent fuel tanks into habitats. You've got SpaceX landing everything in sight, and then just recently we had a launch from New Zealand with Rocket Lab, and they're geared towards specifically launching small satellites. It's just, there's everything you can think of. Somebody is trying to do it right now, and it's it's taking time, and there are failures. Sadly, we no longer have a winner for the Google Lunar X Prize as of today. But they're trying, and even in the face of failure, they keep going, and that's what I really love. And I'm just excited for the next couple of years, because I think there's just going to be a metaphorical explosion of new ideas and things. Yeah.
So personally, I'm excited about a few different just projects and missions I'm working on. We're actually working on a couple of CubeSats that are launched. Some of those are through the Launch Services Program. And so we're working on a couple of CubeSats right now that are going to go into Earth orbit, but there's also a bunch of CubeSats. So a CubeSat, oh yeah, have to be careful. So a CubeSat is a spacecraft that's like this big, real size. It's not just a model, it's actually physically the size of like a Kleenex box. It's 4 inches by 4 inches by 4 inches is a 1-unit CubeSat, and then you can have 2 units or 3 units or whatever. They might be even this big. But CubeSats are this really cool new opportunity to do relatively inexpensive and also relatively high-risk missions. And so there's a lot of CubeSats so far that have been launched into Earth orbit to do some test demonstrations and some science, but there's all these really cool concepts for CubeSats to go to the moon. There's a bunch of CubeSats that are going to launch as a piggyback on the EM1 mission, so that's the big Orion mission that's going to go out past the moon, right? And it's going to take a bunch of CubeSats with it and drop some of them off to study the moon, and then some of them are going to study deep space and space weather, which is basically the stuff that's coming from the sun. And so there's a lot of really cool missions that don't get as much hype a lot of times because they're tiny, but they're going to do some really, really awesome science. And I'm also pretty involved in the suborbital spaceflight community, so Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, and some of those companies that are really pushing the bounds of being able to do suborbital flight, and that's going to be both for science, which has been up and coming, but also then for actually putting humans on a suborbital rocket, both for tourism and for science. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And kind of piggybacking on that, there's now more rockets or launch vehicles than ever for science, so that's kind of exciting. Right?
Yeah, no, my job has become much more daunting because I have a rocket launching like every 5 minutes, and I'm like, I just can't cover them all.
Okay. All right, so we're going to jump back over to Hibah. So I thought this was really cool. You were honored, I believe, last year by the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad for your achievements in engineering. Can you talk about that and kind of how that came about and what it meant to you?
So just to give everyone a quick background about myself, I was born in Pakistan, and my story is actually featured on the Women at NASA website. And the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan saw the story, and last year they were running a campaign for Women's History Month, which is in March. And they requested a short video message from me to encourage women to pursue careers in STEM. And NASA Kennedy Space Center produced a video that featured me, and in the video I talked a little bit about the Pegasus Cygnus mission, which was the last mission that I had worked at that time. And I talked about the reasons why I pursued STEM, which we went over earlier. One of the other things that I mentioned in the video is, which I'd like to reiterate, is to those who think that STEM fields are hard, I would like to say that anything in life that is worth achieving is hard, and you have to work hard at it. So keep that in mind. We got a lot of positive feedback from the embassy on that video, like I said, the purpose was to to encourage women to pursue STEM fields. But I also hope that for any parents that were watching that video, that they would also, if they have daughters or sons who are interested in STEM fields, they would encourage them to pursue those fields as well.
Awesome. So this one's for Anna. You told me a little bit about a conference that you recently helped host that took quite a while of planning. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. So recently, the McDonald Planetarium at the St. Louis Science Center hosted the Pleiades National Planetarium Conference, so named because there are 7 regional organizations for planetariums in the United States, and there are the 7 sister stars in the Pleiades, because we have to name everything about astronomy. And we love it that way. So there was a harebrained idea in 2014 that we should do this. We should bring everyone together. And originally the plan was that we were going to bring everybody together to watch the eclipse in St. Louis and have the conference coincide with that. And thank goodness that fell apart very quickly, because I don't think I would be here today. I think I would be in a straitjacket somewhere. That was a lot. That was a lot of planning, and it was definitely worth it. But we pulled all these 7 organizations together to meet, and it took about 3 years of planning, and a large group of people, male and female, and it was a growing experience for me as well, because I actually, around the time that we got most of the organizations to agree that this was a good idea and we were going to do it, was also around the time that I was named my planetarium's manager. My mentor had left to pursue new options in Germany, and so I wound up being promoted into the position, and I'm actually very proud to say I am the first female manager of my planetarium in its history, and I missed being the youngest by 1 year. My other mentor beat me out on that one. It was definitely a lot of things at once, and I had such a good team to help me out, like I said, both male and female, and from all of the organizations. So it was an opportunity to bring together all of these planetarians. So planetarians are technicians, educators, astronomers. Some of us have degrees in science, some of us don't. Some of us have degrees in graphic design, and they're the ones who create all of the beautiful, wonderful renderings and animations that we use in our domes. Some of them are the ones who keep our optomechanical projectors going, and an optomechanical projector, simply put, is not digital. So they're the ones that are usually the big balls in the middle of the room. That's what my planetarium has, and I love it. There's fiber optics that make all the stars, and if you want to talk to me about that later, I'm more than happy to go on forever about the science behind my projector. I think optics are the coolest thing ever. So we brought all these planetarians together under one dome, and we spent almost an entire week together learning from each other, and it was an amazing experience to see everybody learning from each other, and we actually had a large contingent of people come in from outside of the United States as well, because they wanted to be a part of it too. So we had an international group come in, but one of the things that I very much noted was a younger generation was present. I think there were more young planetarians there than I had ever seen previously, and I noticed a lot more women. I remember my first conference, I was one of the few young women there. And it was great because there were a lot of veteran and very well experienced women there, but I didn't see a whole lot of women who looked like me. There were a couple, and I definitely bonded with them, but over the last couple years, and particularly coming out of this conference, what I really love is there's actually now a core group of women that I can talk to within my field. And of course, there's men I can talk to as well, but I find that sometimes it is easier to talk to a woman who's going through the same thing at their planetarium, and sometimes we're able to talk about creating events. One of my colleagues in Detroit actually is part of a program, and she promotes a program called the STEMinista Project, and so she does all of these cool projects out in the community, and it's open to boys and girls, but it targets girls in the Detroit area between 4th and 8th grade, I believe it is, and gets them involved in all these cool STEM projects. And so by having this conference, we were able to work together and find out all these different avenues that we could all partake in with each other. And it's something that I hope will continue in the future. And it was something that it was a lot of work, and I do not regret for 1 second that I did it.
Well, you know, we can move into questions. Do you want us to move into audience questions, or yeah, okay. So, but before we do that, I wanted to make sure there was nothing that anyone else wanted to add about their work, or maybe how to get in touch, or if you're looking for any mentors. We know some people. So, is there anything anyone wanted to add before we jump in? No. Okay. All right. Mike, do you want to do questions? Okay. Oh, okay, so there's 2 microphones on either side of the stage. So if anyone has any questions, come on up. They don't bite.
We're really far away, so it's fine.
You bite sometimes?
Well, we're really far away. So.
Oh, okay, all right.
Can't do much damage.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Me too.
Do you ever think that we will ever go to Mars, and how many people will be women? Like, do any of you think
Who wants to take a shot at that?
Do we all say yes together?
Yes. Hashtag yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, I definitely think we're going to go to Mars. There is a lot of robotic exploration already on Mars, and a lot of that's paving the way, I think, for things that we can do with humans on Mars. You cover a lot of what's going on in that area also, but I think that your generation actually will probably be the ones who are really at Mars. I'm too old now, so that's unfortunate, but I'd rather go to the moon anyway, so.
Same.
Yeah, all right. But so I think that a large percentage of people will be women, and part of that is we take up less space. No, I'm just kidding. I do think a large percentage of them will be women, just because if you look at the field and you look at the most recent astronaut classes, for instance, right, there's a huge percentage of, I think it was at least 50-50 in the last couple of classes. And a lot of the people that go to Mars probably aren't going to be just selected by NASA, right? There are a lot of these kooky commercial space industry people who are going to be sending people as well.
Yeah, I think one thing's for sure, it's not going to look like any missions that we've seen before. In order to get to Mars, it's going to be a huge hybrid effort between the commercial space industry and NASA. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we have even, private astronauts mixed in with NASA astronauts as well.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be something too where they're going to be looking at a lot of different things. They're going to be building teams that can work together. Teamwork is going to be a huge part of this because you're going to be spending 8 months with those people. And you're going to have to be able to get along, and so I think a co-ed group is a great way to do that. You're also going to need to be able to do multiple roles. Just oftentimes, like I know at my job, I have to wear many hats and do many different tasks. Astronauts have to be able to do the same thing. You have to be able to do a certain amount of doctor abilities, like right now on the International Space Station, they get trained on drawing their own blood so that it can be tested and things of the like. And also it's probably going to be an international endeavor. So you're going to be working with people from all around the world, male and female, and using multiple languages too. So it's really going to be probably the most diverse, I think, group of people that will be the astronauts going to Mars, and I can't wait to see it because I'm also too old to be included in that group, unfortunately. So, but I hope we get to see you walking on Mars one day.
Hibah, did you have anything you wanted to add, or
No, I think
No.
covered.
Hey, Chelsea, what you got?
All right. I have two questions. The first,
Is her mic on? You can just, okay.
all right. First question actually is for Loren. Being a reporter and having published presence, how do you advocate for women to get involved in these male-dominated fields?
One thing I always try to do, and I will say a lot of coworkers have experienced problems with this, is to try to reach out to women when I do stories. And I absolutely fell into the trap for a while where that wasn't happening, and someone called me out on it, and I was like, you know what, you're 100% right. So yeah, I try to give a platform to female voices as much as I can, and I'm actually very angry with myself if I can't do that for a story, and sometimes it's tough because I think I saw a thread a couple days ago where this one reporter was struggling because she would constantly try to reach out to female experts, and the female experts would defer to their male colleagues because they knew more. And so it's definitely, it can be a struggle, and that sparked a conversation amongst women scientists, and they were like, you know what, we need to stop doing this, we need to feel confident that we know the answers and to come to us. So yeah, that's one way, giving a platform to female scientists, and then also promoting the work of my female colleagues as well. So I try to do both of those as much as possible, and hopefully get some eyes on people who don't necessarily get attention.
Thank you. My second question real quick is actually for Emilee. You've been a great moderator, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
But being a moderator, we actually haven't heard from you, so I kind of wanted to give you a chance. What would you like? Is there anything you would like to say to the audience? Is there anything you'd like the audience to take away?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was so excited when Michael asked me to host this, and that it was going to be an all-female event. And it was, I know I've probably moaned and complained to them multiple times that finding female sources is tough, and sometimes that's, you go through public information officers and they're going to send you to, the principal investigator, which typically happens to be male, or a mission manager, and so that's tough. So this is kind of why we're having this panel, is because I really wish that our reporting field and the people that we report on reflect more of what I know is actually out there. So that's kind of how this came about. So that's my message to share. So I appreciate you guys coming out too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. All right.
Hey, I don't know the actual statistics, but so I could be wrong, but I get the feeling that there are probably more women in academic-oriented professional fields as opposed to non-academic technical professional fields, and I just kind of wanted to get a take on why you guys think that might be.
Addie, do you want to take that one? I mean, I know some stats, but
I don't know the statistics for sure on that. So if you know some of them, I can follow up.
Well, and you can probably add on to this, but I think I mentioned earlier, so women make up a little more than half the population, but the higher you go in education, the less women there are in those fields, so the less faculty you'll see teaching in, say, physics or astronomy, the higher up. But you'll see a lot of undergrad students, and those tend to drop out. So we're at around 14%, I believe, in physics, and like Addie said earlier, planetary science is a little higher. And I think those numbers are from last year, but when you compare 14% to 50% of the population, we're just not there. And I think, and Addie, you're welcome to take it from me, but I think that having female mentorship is really going to be what drives that number to be higher. So.
Yeah, so it's definitely the case, like you just mentioned, that the further up you go in academia, the fewer women there are. And part of that is historical. There's still a lot of people who have been in the field a long time and are still teaching, still professors or whatever. But there is a sort of loss along the way. And some of that is actually people who go into professional fields. So I don't know exactly like what those percentages are. I have heard anecdotally that there are a lot of people that once they get their PhD in physics or astronomy, like some of my colleagues, for instance, they are drawn or end up going more towards some of the NASA centers or research institutions which offer different opportunities than academia. And that's a real challenge for academia, is a lot of the sort of mental image of what it takes to be a professor, what it takes to be at a research one or institution. Whereas there's different balance that maybe you can achieve if you're at a different type of professional setting. But I don't know, a lot of that's anecdotal, so I don't know any of the statistics on it.
So, I don't know, Anna, did you have anything to add? You've been in the education background a little bit. No, not really? Okay.
I do know, having seen standardized test scores, they test at, I believe it's the 4th grade, the 8th grade, and the 12th grade levels on math and science. And in 4th grade, the boys and the girls are pretty much equal in their math and science scores. And then you get to middle school, and there starts to be a discrepancy, and the boys are scoring higher. And by the time you get to high school, there is a huge gap in those test scores, and the boys are scoring much higher. And I know, at least if I think back to when I was in school, it was around that middle school period where all of a sudden it turned into, well, science is a boys thing. And this is where I'm going to say, if you like science, even if you don't like science, it's not a boy thing. It's an everyone thing. I used to go into my 7th grade science classroom at lunch and do extra experiments because it was fun. So if you like science, it doesn't matter. But unfortunately, I think that idea is still out there, and it's totally false. Science is for everyone, but we got to keep reiterating that, I think, because
yeah, it's science and technology, right? So
yes.
One important thing is that in planetary we're getting better parity, but in some of the engineering fields it's still pretty low. And the other thing is, it's not just women, it's other minorities as well. So there's a huge problem in a lot of in the astronomy field, is what I know better, planetary science field, of minority participation. And so these are all things that we know as a field are issues, and we're scientists, right? So we try to study why these problems exist and how we can find solutions to them. And so a lot of that is just with mentorship and creating different types of communities than you typically see in these fields.
I think it's also really important to go back to the Me Too movement, because I've heard, and I think this is, very poignant, that if a woman does experience harassment or something of that kind, that's kind of an opportunity cost for her, because she has to take time out of her life to deal with that, and that could be better spent studying or working towards that PhD. So hopefully, as we move forward and this movement continues, that will be less of an issue and a barrier for women moving forward.
Great. Okay. Hibah, did you want to add anything? Or
you're okay? I don't know what the reason is for the gap, but I just would like to say that anyone who is interested in math and science should pursue a career in STEM. That's all I'd like to reiterate.
That's a great ad, yeah. All right, I see a NASA shirt over there.
What's your favorite planet and why?
Ooh. Who wants to start with this one?
I'm sorry, didn't hear. Can you repeat the question?
She said, what's your favorite planet and why, right? Is that the question? Yeah.
Favorite planet?
Favorite planet, yeah. That's tough.
My favorite planet is Earth, because I
Okay.
live here.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay.
It's a pretty good one.
I have to say, Saturn won me over as I was covering the end of the Cassini mission. And I mean, Saturn's lovely and its rings are beautiful, but honestly, it's the moons that kind of enticed me. I really hope that we go back to Enceladus, which is just this fascinating little moon that most likely has this underwater or under surface ocean, and it has these plumes, and it has all of these weird ingredients that could host life, and even though it's so far from the sun, it's just so crazy. So yeah, I'd have to say Saturn, because it just has so many surprises and gifts.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, she's ready.
That's always a difficult question, and I feel like I'm always flip-flopping around. I love Venus's harsh atmosphere, and talking about that, and I love the gas giants and how mysterious they are. And on a aesthetic note, Uranus is green, and green is my favorite color, and also my last name. But I think when it boils down to it, my first experience with seeing a planet in a telescope was Jupiter. And also when it comes to my star projector, Jupiter's the one that likes to make me think the most when it decides that it misses me and it wants to have some problems. And so I actually wear a Jupiter from my projector around my neck from when we replaced the Hubble slide that we use. And so I like having a little bit of Jupiter with me at all times. So that's I think my favorite one right there.
Let's see, I can get in a lot of trouble for this. So in terms of fascinating planets that we've gotten a lot of really cool exploration of recently, so Saturn is definitely one of those things that, like, from the Cassini mission, there was all this amazing imagery and also really interesting science data. But it's also one of the ones that if you look at it through a telescope, right, it looks like the thing you think of. There's this planet with these rings around it. And like a lot of people that when they come to the observatory at UCF, Robinson Observatory, they are like, is that a sticker on the telescope? And you're like, no, that's the real thing.
Saturn.
And then with Jupiter, sometimes you can see the moons next to it. But I also sometimes like to redirect this question and say, my favorite planetary body is the moon.
Yeah.
Redirect.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
Always.
All right. Oh, wait. Oh, we'll go back over here and we'll come back to you in just a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Me again.
That's all right.
I was just wondering, because in my math class, it's the highest math class in 7th grade, and there's 4 girls in it, including me.
Yay.
And there's about 25 kids in it total. So I was wondering if you thought that had anything to do with how we're put on the same path in elementary school, and then we get to choose our own path in middle school, and it kind of, girls are less confident, so they think I should be in the standard or the advanced. So I was wondering what you think of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the same boat in school for sure because I loved math, and I was always in the advanced classes, but everyone always seemed to make a note of that. Like, oh, you're the girl that's good at math, or you're the smart girl, and it did not like that. And I don't think that should be, that shouldn't be like a superlative, that should be the norm. And it's when I got to high school, I had a wonderful calculus teacher she was just amazing, and I felt less weird, but I can definitely, I hoped things were changing, I hope they are, but yeah, I think there is a tendency to call women out for that, and I think we should definitely stop because we're all great at math and science.
Yeah, a lot of that comes from socialization, right? So you hang out with your friends who are going to take these certain classes, and then you talk to each other about what classes you want to take, and also different people are encouraged to take different classes, and a lot of that does come from what we've talked about a little bit, and about what you said about like just sort of being able to choose, and you're maybe going to choose the classes your friends are in. So I would say encourage more of your friends to join you in your class. But also, that's on a lot of the teachers, right, to identify the students and say, no, you're really good and you should be in this upper level class, instead of just sort of letting them go by, because it's not always as easy to see that in yourself, to see that you should be going on to the next level or something like that. Like, there's a lot of self-doubt and things like that that hold people back. And so I think that seeing people like you at that upper level class, right? So maybe the classes under you will see like, oh, there were all these awesome girls in this class, and I should also take that class because I can do it too, right? So it takes a little bit of that image as well. But tell your teachers to encourage other girls to take the class.
Be an ambassador.
Yeah.
And also, my parents, they made me go to the art classes. And I'm
Good job,
glad they
parents.
did.
You have very encouraging parents.
Nothing
Good job,
wrong with art.
Yes. All right, we got one over here. You're gonna go ahead?
So I was just wondering, I know we were
I spend most of my job writing. So I have a lot of so I have to write proposals to get funding to do my science. So I do a lot of, it's more technical writing, but if you are a good writer, it makes your proposals sound better and you're more likely to get funding. But I'll let somebody else take this now because there's a lot of other people who do also scientific writing.
So to add to that, in my job at NASA, I do a lot of writing too. And the kind of writing we do is we do technical assessments. So anytime there's an issue or a problem with a rocket, we put together the story. What's the background, what the issue is, how are we going to fix it, what the recommendation is. And not only do I have to write that all out, I actually have to present it in a room full of other engineers and managers. And then I get asked questions on my technical assessment, and I need to be prepared to answer those questions.
And within the museum, we definitely do a lot of writing, some more than others. If you're out on the floor, you may not do as much, but what's really cool about at least my museum in particular and the planetarium is that if you want to do the writing, you have the opportunity. So I've been published in journals and in magazines for work I've done or mentoring or things like that, articles that I've written talking about my planetarium, talking about programs. I write lesson plans a lot. So I have to find a way to get the interesting tidbits of science across to people. I have to make sure that it fits in with the state and national science standards. And also if I want to reach out to other subject areas, for example, I created an all-live interactive entirely in French star show. So now I have to make sure that meets foreign language standards too. You put all of that together in this lesson plan, and then you have that lesson plan there so that other people can read that and know how to communicate that out as well. And now with Destination Moon, I get to do one of my favorite things, which is research. I get to read and read and read some more all about these different people and these different programs and the science behind the rockets and the spacecraft. And then I get to write about that. And eventually that's going to go, and it's going through a team, and that'll go out into the exhibit.
Well, I do writing for my job as well, but I will say that talking with someone who is a great writer and communicator and also a great scientist is a dream in my job because it makes my job so much easier when a scientist can easily communicate what they are working on in a way that I can understand. So I think being a writer will make you an even better scientist or engineer.
Yeah, thanks for your
Definitely
question.
pursue both.
Yeah.
Both. Communication is important. All right, do we have any other questions? Oh, go for it.
Hi. My question is, I'm really happy to be here. This is so great that you guys are doing this. And I was sitting here listening to this discussion, and I've seen so many of these panels, and I don't really think I've ever seen an all-female panel talking about STEM forever. And I'm thinking, how do we get more of that? So basically my question is, how can people like myself be an ally and make sure more of these things are happening so we can have more females on stage discussing science and inspiring others?
That's a good question.
Invite females
Yeah.
to participate in panels.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's
Make
an
an
easy
effort.
answer, right? But
Kind of going back to what I said earlier is lift up female voices. You know, I try to do that, and it can be tough, but the more people that are working on that. One thing that I've been really encouraged by is a bunch of my colleagues and peers have put together lists of women in science and STEM, and that way we don't have an excuse anymore of not talking to these really smart and experienced women. So yeah, finding women that you respect and then lifting up their voices and sharing their work, I think will do wonders.
I talked a lot about the females in the planetarium community that I've bonded with and that we bounce things off of each other, but I have a really great group of male colleagues as well who support females and diversity within the field as well, and the gentleman who arranged for us all to be sitting up here tonight is one of them. And so one, I would recommend talking to him, but two, also getting the males that you work with to bond together and being those allies and those supports and inviting the women in as well. Because when we all work together, well, that just makes everything go better.
Awesome. Hibah, do you have anything to add? No. All right.
I had one little thing I wanted to add. I imagine you guys, you're doing a lot of outreach outside of these kinds of things. Do you find yourself reaching out to communities that normally aren't interested in STEM to get them interested, or a group of people who are already excited about and want to do what you're doing?
So we do that a lot at the planetarium. And we've had so many different groups come in that you would not imagine bringing into an astronomy center. So we do yoga under the stars regularly, and we bring in yogis, and then they come back and see shows later. And each yoga session also involves a star show, so we hook them that way. But we also do, we bring in a group from the St. Louis Symphony called the Strings of Arda, and they do usually a theme like Water Worlds, or they've done the Golden Record before, Under the Stars. We have a Shake 38 festival where all 38 of Shakespeare's plays are done the week of his birthday throughout St. Louis in various forms, and we've had 2 different ones over the course of the last couple years performed in the planetarium under the stars. And so we bring in these different groups. We've had dancers come in and dance in the planetarium. We have all kinds of events in there. And so And like I said, even now, just me trying to reach out to foreign language teachers and bringing them in to see a show, or getting students who are on their spring break from another country to come in and see the show so that they can learn English that way. Just reaching out to these different groups has been huge, and it's really cool to see how that impacts them and gets them thinking, and then maybe they come back for a telescope party later in the month, and you start seeing them, and all of a sudden, some of them become your regulars, and it's really cool to see that happen.
I had something to add to your previous question. I just wanted to mention that there is a NASA Speakers Bureau. You can go online and put in a request for if you have an event or a group that you'd like a NASA speaker to come talk. If you'd like to invite a NASA speaker to one of your events or groups, you can go online and put in a request, and you can specify if you want a female engineer, for example, to come talk to your group. Or if you want to specify a specific topic, there's a field in there that you can put that in as well. So just wanted to mention that.
Well, I was going to add one more thing. So I work at a university, so that affords me certain chances to make better connections with the community. And one of the big things about working at a university that's as big as UCF or anywhere, any sort of university and school setting, is that it allows us chances to go out to middle schools and high schools and really get to students when they're younger, hopefully, and maybe interested in STEM, but maybe not all that interested yet. But also, we're always looking for ways to reach out to the community and to after-school groups or other groups where you might not expect somebody who does planetary science, who builds experiments, to come and talk to your group. But it gives us a really good chance to get our science out there, but also get them to know what opportunities there are in different fields. And so we're always looking for new ways to do that. So feel free to reach out to us or anything like that.
I will definitely reach out.
Okay.
Ricardo hosts Nerd Night, so if you don't know about Nerd Night, you should. It's a little more, not as kid-friendly, but it involves drinking and learning nerdy things, so it's fun. I recommend checking it out. All right, go ahead.
Addie, you mentioned that the higher you go in academia, there's less women in those positions, in the higher positions. I wonder if there's something actively preventing that from happening, or if there's just a lack of individual initiative to get to that position, or if there's something else going on there.
I don't think it's a lack of individual initiative. I think that there have been systematic, so we've talked about this a little bit, right, with people going into the upper level math class, right? There are a lot of social and systematic things that happen throughout our lives that make us make the choices we make. There are fewer female faculty in physics and astronomy because you lose people along the way, right? And I don't know exactly, I stayed in it, right? So I don't know exactly why they are, but there are a lot of things that have been addressed recently in the community that have not been incredibly supportive of having women, right? People of all different ages and genders and races, right, have different needs that they have as part of their life and as part of what they need to do to be a happy and successful person. And so there are a lot of really complicated factors that I think go into why people are lost in sort of that pipeline of sorts, right? So I don't have all of the answers to that, but I think that a lot of it comes from maybe not seeing people up at that level, and maybe not being fully encouraged along the way. And I think a lot of that is changing. There are obviously a lot more groups that are encouraging women in STEM and that are trying to bring up those averages, and it is starting to change. There are higher percentages now, and it is going to take a little while to sort of have that turnover, because there are still a lot of faculty who have been there for a long time and are going to stay for a little while longer. But it is starting to turn over a little bit.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
When you were at school, what was your favorite subject?
What was your favorite subject when you were in school?
No, what was your least
Oh,
favorite?
least favorite. Ooh, okay.
PE. I can't run, even if a bear was chasing, like the bear would just get to eat me. I can't run.
What was your favorite? Or least favorite,
Least
sorry.
favorite. That's a difficult one.
That's a hard question.
That's all right.
Okay,
We're all such nerds.
So, I'm gonna have to think about that. Can
All
I come
right,
back to it?
we'll circle back. Does anybody else have one?
I'm trying to think.
I have a few least favorite teachers.
Oh.
I don't know about subjects. I won't name any names.
I think that's a hard question. A lot of, I was always interested in a lot of different things. So like one of my minors in college was anthropology, and I almost like double majored in anthropology because I just like learning about lots of different things. But I guess, I don't know, maybe like government, but that's really important to know about, so
Yeah.
maybe not my least favorite subject.
Okay.
You stumped us, good job.
Yeah,
That was a
hard one.
stumper.
Stumped the panel.
When I mentioned that I failed a physics exam once. At that point in time, physics was my least favorite subject.
I will say biology, in terms of the sciences, my favorite is physics, then chemistry and biology. And for a lot of my fellow women classmates, it was the opposite. And I felt like I was on some parallel universe.
Nice. Great question. Hey, Robin, what are you going to ask?
I have a question for Loren and Emilee. You guys have been covering space throughout this pretty tumultuous last few years. What mission stands out to each of you? I know you've covered a bunch of them, but which one's your favorite?
You can go first.
I'm trying to think.
I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the first mission that stands out to me is the first mission that I covered was the CRS-7, which didn't make it. So that was my first real space story that I covered for the Sentinel. I was covering for our veteran space reporter, Scott Powers, at the time. And they said, oh, we'll send Emilee, it'll be fine. And it blew up. So that was memorable for me, but my favorite mission to cover for a positive reason would definitely be New Horizons and Pluto. Love me some Pluto pics. So, and there's more to come from that mission too, so that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think most of them stand out for me are the ones that happen on holidays, which they always seem to do. The Juno mission inserted itself into orbit on the 4th of July in Jupiter. But in terms of my favorite ones, I came to the Verge right before the Pluto mission, so that was a bit of a whirlwind, and I loved that. And then also, it was a SpaceX CRS mission. It was my first SpaceX launch. I can't remember which number.
CRS-9.
Of course. And I used an acronym. It's a commercial resupply mission. Apology. But the great thing about that was, it was a nighttime launch, and they landed. It was the second one they landed on land. And I wanted to go because I wanted to see the landing, because I'd been covering all these landings, and it was just so cool. And we made a video about it, and you can see me acting like like the biggest gleeful child in the video, because they just put the camera on me, and the whole time I'm like, wow. So yeah, that was definitely a very special mission for me.
There's a lot of them. Anyone want to take the lead? You want to start, Addie? I'm thinking of some at UCF, but
yeah, I mean, so there are usually robotics clubs in middle schools and high schools. Sometimes they're FIRST robotics, so like with Legos, but also sometimes it's just a robotics club. There's a group I work with at one of the one of the high schools near UCF that does. It's called They call it GEMS Robotics, and it's girls in engineering, math, and science. And most universities have GEMS programs, so girls in engineering, math, and science, that will work at the university, but also often will work with groups in the area. And so there's always really great opportunities there to get involved. And if you're not familiar with them, like at your school, always you can go talk to, I don't know, one of your math or science teachers, right? And they will probably know a couple of the different clubs that are at your school. And there's also usually different groups like at science centers and things like that, where you can go and get involved either for a summer or for a summer job or something like that. And as you know, there are lots of really great fellowship opportunities for people of all ages and of all backgrounds, right? To do maybe an undergrad, maybe work at an undergraduate university even when you're in high school, or to work somewhere else while you're an undergrad. And so there's lots of really cool opportunities for that. So like the REU program, the Research Experience for Undergraduates program in undergrad, lets you go to like a different university and do research for a summer kind of thing. And there are lots of budding opportunities in aerospace and in different fields. One of the biggest challenges, as you sort of hinted at, right, is that there are actually a lot of them out there, but it takes a little bit of work sometimes, and there are some good listings of some of them, but I don't know the websites off the top of my head.
So you mentioned science centers. And I mentioned earlier the STEMinista program, which is through the Michigan Science Center in Detroit. However, you don't have to be in Michigan to utilize its resources. Obviously, for the things that are on site, you have to be on site to utilize those. But they have a whole website full of their STEMinistas, and you can go on and learn about them. And it's pretty cool. And they're from all over. There's a fair number of female planetarians in there, but there's also, I believe, some NASA engineers are in there. There's definitely professors in there. There's the whole gamut. And then I will say, for me, I wasn't super aware of any mentor programs, at least when I was in school, but I had teachers that clicked for me. And so I would go to them, and I think it was kind of an unspoken mentorship. My 7th grade science teacher, my 8th and 9th grade math teacher, who had a lot of patience with me. Thank you, Mr. Punches. My 10th grade biology teacher, my French teacher. And you go through school and you find these teachers, and they'll take you under their wing. And but I would also say ask. My first boss at the planetarium, I flat out asked him, will you mentor me? And when he left, my other mentor, I asked if he would mentor me. And both of them said yes, and I think they were a little stunned I asked them. But that makes the biggest difference. And it was actually a professor I had in grad school who said you should make it official, like go ask them, don't just assume, which is good advice on anything. You should always ask and not assume. But yeah, if there's a teacher you click with, or a boss, or maybe you're doing an internship and the person who's overseeing your internship is someone that you trust and you think you can learn from, ask them to mentor you. That's one of the best things that I ever did, was ask.
That's great advice. Hibah, do you have anything?
I just wanted to add that you can also find a mentor in a fellow student who may have already taken the class before you or senior to you, because I've done that, and that helps a lot as well.
In terms of what I do, I I found out after I wanted to become a science writer that they actually have grads programs specifically for science writing. So a notable one is at NYU called SHRP for Science, Health, Environmental, something reporting program. That's it, yeah. And but there's other grad programs all over the country. But that said, I didn't go to grad school, so that's not necessarily a prerequisite to go into science writing. And there are tons of groups geared towards science writing groups. You know, like there's Sweeney, which I believe is Science Writers in New York. There's the National Association of Science Writers. So there's a bunch of groups that you can talk to, and if you don't have the means to go to grad school, what I did was talk to people who went to those grad programs, and they helped me to find my way into certain fields. So those are some options if you want to specifically go into science communication.
Go ahead.
You mentioned lifting each other up and promoting each other, and I think it's really important to have a good support system, whether it's your parents, your spouse, siblings. I just wanted to know if you guys think your support systems are special in some way and inherently better, and that helped you be successful.
That's a great question. Does anyone want to take a stab first?
Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly lucky to be here. I mean, not only I'll write a story and then I'll call my parents about it and be like, what do you think, you know? So it's great that my parents are some of my biggest readership, to be honest. But yeah, I think that they've really helped me, and they're just as nerdy as I am, so it's been very great to have them support me through my career.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier I had a pretty supportive teachers and things like that throughout my school experiences, but my parents were always very supportive from early on. Neither of them are really math or science people, but they were like, yeah, go for it. You like those things. And I liked space from early on, so they always helped encourage that. And I do think that like finding people who are around you who help balance you and help support you along the way, it's really important. A lot of the things we do are challenging, and they are time-consuming, and they're exhausting, and so it is really important to have a supportive network around you, and maybe it's not like a significant other, but maybe it is just a network of friends. A lot of times in undergrad and in grad school, you find cohorts of people that help you get to the next level, and I think it takes a lot of times, it takes a group of people to really support you and do that.
I would agree. You asked if we think ours are inherently better than anyone. I mean, I would hope we all think ours are inherently better than the others. But I think again, it's finding people who work for you. And I am fortunate that my not just my parents, but my entire family on both sides of my family have been incredibly supportive. But also those teachers, and then I call them my froligs, my friend colleagues, because it has turned into that support system of being uplifting and supporting each other and promoting each other. And hey, I did this program. I have one colleague who did a program who's in Peoria, and so she's been pushing for some more of us to try and do that program now. And, you know, hey, I saw this opening for this grant. I think this would be good for your institution. I saw this grant. This is something that definitely applies to you and you should do. Maybe this is something we could apply for together with our institutions, or maybe our institutions could work together on this. And so having that network, not just throughout the country, but throughout the world even, is that's made a huge difference for me too.
So I'm very fortunate that throughout my life I've had people who have been very supportive, starting out with my parents. There's a saying that I read that behind every child who believes in themselves is a parent who believed first, and that is absolutely true, because my parents, there have been times in life where I have not been sure whether I can do something or not, but my parents knew I could do it. So I'm glad I'm glad to have my parents. And my dad in particular, he was very good at math. So He would always encourage me to do well in math, and he would always say, practice makes perfect. And in addition to my parents, the teachers that I've had through school, university, and the team that I work with, my team lead, manager, everyone has been very supportive with everything that I wanted to do.
I just wanted to say that you all are very successful, and you all said that it was your parents originally that supported you. And obviously, all the young girls here, their parents brought them here. And at UCF particularly, and I want to say at UCF particularly, there are organizations specifically for women, like the Society of Women's Engineers. So if any of you want to be an engineer, there is that support system at UCF for you.
There's also the Physics Women's Society at UCF. There's also a lot of just other organizations like SEDS and things like that that support women at the different levels at UCF. And I'm sure there are some at other universities too. I'm not saying there's not. That's just the one I know.
Also, I believe we have people from the Brooke Owens Fellowship here too, which I think is a really cool program that I think it just started a couple years ago. And it's specifically geared towards getting women into aerospace fields.
Yeah, this is its second year.
Second year, yeah.
So I think this is going to be our last question because it's 9 o'clock, so go for it. Oh, that's tough. Anyone want to go first?
So the first grant I ever got was to develop an adaptation for a star show, early childhood star show that we have for visitors who are blind. I wanted to make that something that they could experience. And as I mentioned earlier, we discovered shortly thereafter that it also worked really well for children who have an autism spectrum disorder. And there was a group that came in, and they had a couple kids who had low vision, so they asked for the follow-along books, and we did the activity with the plushes beforehand and everything. And there was one little boy that we gave the book to, and he started looking at the book, and at one point the head teacher came over to me and said that he just completely changed when he got the book, and he was on the spectrum and was very quiet. He had some verbal ability, but he was pretty quiet normally. And when he got this book with the tactile images in it, he started reading it out loud to anybody who would listen to him. Anybody. So then fast forward to a couple months later, the same group came back and the little boy was with them again, and so we gave him the book again, and again he started reading out loud to anybody who would listen to him, talking about stars and how excited he was about stars and singing about stars. And that book unlocked a part of him that didn't normally exist there, and it made him excited to come to the planetarium and excited to talk to other people. And I'm not gonna lie, I went in my office and was like, okay. And I had to take a moment, and I think that program and reaching all the kids that we've reached and showing them, I've had kids come and tell me that they're going to study astronomy in college. They didn't think they could previously because they were blind, but now they're gonna be astronomers, and that I did my job there.
So my proudest moment, I already mentioned, was the Falcon 9 Jason 3 launch. And that was because this was my first time I worked on certification of a rocket, and I had no idea what all it entailed. So it was a learning experience, and I was very happy to see a successful launch. So I would say that is my proudest moment so far.
Awesome. Loren or Addie?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I'm still thinking. I will say that it's very small, but, and it's similar to what you were talking about, but when when we made Spacecraft, I was very nervous because it was a very personal project and it had my face everywhere and the comments I was just dreading and everything. But then one of my coworkers, who he actually works on our video game website under Vox, he messaged me and he said, "You're not going to believe it, but my daughters are obsessed with your show, obsessed. They love it. And I spent all weekend teaching them how to get into orbit because of it." And I just started weeping. I think it was also a very stressful day, but it definitely, you spend so much time putting work into these projects that you don't really think about the impact that they're having. So just for a couple of minutes, I was confronted with the good work that we did, and that was just a really special moment for me.
So I have sort of two points, because I have two roles, both as an educator and as a research scientist. And one of the most recent ones was that I've been teaching for the last few semesters physics for non-majors. So I teach physics 2 for people who are generally going to be pre-med or biomed. And I was reading my comments from the last semester recently, and that's usually something that's not the best thing to do. But it was actually mostly really uplifting, and I had a few students who said, I came in dreading physics, and the class was at 8 a.m., and it was thought I was going to hate everything about it, but you made me actually interested in physics and interested in science and the way to ask these questions, and that's my ultimate goal as an educator. So it was that was a really good moment for me to read some of those comments just about actually making an impact on students. And the other thing is actually I've built a couple of experiments that have launched to the ISS, to the International Space Station, and so watching those launch was pretty amazing. and then getting the data back. But so getting the data back is always important, and so all of that was pretty phenomenal.
Awesome. All right, so I think we're going to wrap it up, but these guys will probably be sticking around for a minute or two if you want to get their autographs or anything like that. I want to thank Seminole State College for having us here and letting us have this panel, and Michael McConville, who's sitting over there. It is his last week with the Planetarium, and I don't know how we're going to do it without him after this. It's sad that he's leaving. So again, thank you all for coming, and those parents for bringing your kids out on a school night. Props. Thanks.